Okay. This is what it would look like. We have this observation, that blue dot in the middle, for some economy that's advanced enough such that average GDP per capita is what is about 3 times the subsistence. And the subsistence is not a vague, fuzzy notion. When we start doing the empirical analysis, we're going to go to the World Bank and look at Martin Ravillon's stuff and use the $1-a-day principles to construct the subsistence levels, extending the price PPPs back in that story. Okay, so there's an observation for some country. This is the maximum inequality, so that's the inequality possibility frontier. So that curve where those red squares describe the maximum inequality that could be achieved at these different levels of development. And for this particular economy, it could be right up there on that curve, but it's not. It's a blue dot. So the actual inequality is that distance A. The maximum inequality is that distance B. The ratio of one A to the other B is the extraction ratio. And it'll offer some number here. I don't know. What do you think that number is? Something like 60%, I guess. And then you can compare that with other economies to see who has the higher extraction ratios, as well as who has the higher levels of inequality. Okay. Does it matter which of these measures one uses? The extraction ratio of just a plain old measure of inequality like the Gini coefficient? This is critical, folks. And I'm going to take the Latin American case now, a part of the world where the inequality debates are very contentious and intense, where there is a belief that the Iberians did it, that the Iberians put in institutions in Latin America that modern Latin America just can't shed very easily. And so they're prisoners of the Iberian systems that were put in, which of course favored the elite, and still do. So Latin Americans are very disappointed in the fact that across the 20th century, there is no reduction in inequality in Latin America. Meanwhile, of course, there's this revolutionary decline in inequality in the advanced economies associated with the rise of the welfare state. But not in Latin America. It doesn't budge. It just stays at this high level. Okay, so they get depressed about this. Now, look what happens when you just don't look at measures of inequality like a Gini coefficient in Latin America, but also look at this extraction ratio. Here's what you get. The extraction ratio has fallen everywhere over the past century. Brazil, of course, we know about the last decade under Lula. Is it Lulu or Lula? Lula. Very impressive increase in the position of poor in that society and an erosion of high levels of inequality. But it's, if you look at the extraction rate, it's declined over 130 years. The Gini coefficient hasn't, but the extraction rate has. That is, the elite could have done a lot better than they did. And we want to know why they didn't try to do better by devising institutions that got them more of the pie than they did. So the extraction ratio falls in Brazil, falls even more in Chile. It had a long way to fall, by the way. Chile was about the most unequal place in the world. And even bigger in Mexico, the extraction rate. These are very unequal societies, but the extraction rate has fallen dramatically. They could be far more unequal than they in fact are not. Same thing is true of Peru. So we have to agree when we debate inequality issues and whether they matter to performance of economies like growth, whether we use extraction ratios or whether we use Gini coefficients to measure the grip that the elite has on the economy and its institutions in its favor, which may be anti-growth. Okay, so we'll set that issue aside, but we should worry about it. And I would just love to see somebody come up with the Philippine evidence so we can see where it fits in all the evidence I'm about to show you. But as far as I know, we don't. Okay, so we're going to use the social tables. And those social tables ignore, because we don't have the evidence, any variance within each of these classes, and just looks at the variance across these classes. And I may wave my hands a little bit and do upper bounds, lower bounds, and you're not interested in that. In fact, it doesn't turn out to be all that important, but it made the referees happier at the Economic Journal. So we persuaded them that we were okay by doing it. I should point out that there are a lot of potential observations we threw out. It's just amazing how much evidence there is out there, in pre-industrial evidence. I mean, you can get the distribution of income for Juarez, you can get it for medieval Paris, but we don't want it. We don't want it because these are agrarian societies, these are rural societies. We're not interested in the distribution within a very small portion of those societies, but rather the whole. So we heave those out. So that leaves us with, we now have more than 27 observations, but this PowerPoint is geared to 27, so you're stuck with the 27 when I'm giving this. Okay, I talked about that. We'll come back to that issue. And the trick is to estimate per capita income for all these economies. No problem. Angus Madison estimates it, back, 8 millennia. So we can rely heavily on his stuff. And the subsistence information is taken directly from the World Bank and the $1-a-day rule. And then we use PPP evidence to walk it back into these ancient societies. Go read the paper to get the gory details. You should go read the paper so you can do it for the Philippines. Okay, so here you go. Here are some examples of the economies for which we can make these estimations. The upper bound Gini 1, lower bound Gini 1, upper bound Gini 2, the maximum feasible Gini under two sets of assumptions, two assumptions about the subsistence. We can do that for all the countries in the sample, and that's what you get. So there's the plot of the evidence we've got. And it looks very clean, and when you plot this evidence like this, it looks very clean, and it persuades you the evidence must be really good. Well, why not? There's China, and with a relatively low level of inequality, which China had until when? 30 years ago, the start of double digits. And then it lost it. The important thing is China is off that inequality frontier. When it's very poor, pre-industrial, it's off that frontier. That is, the elite in China could have done a lot better if they were just a little cleverer. They could have pushed it up even higher. Contrast that, and Japan is quite a ways off that possibility frontier. Note that both these two economies escaped at least direct colonialism. China didn't quite escape, and nor did Japan, with Dewey's guns trained on the Japanese, trade or die, and so on. But still, it wasn't the direct form of being colonies, and one wonders to what extent that matters, bringing both those two economies below the inequality possibility frontier, where, of course, inequality would have been much higher. India, on the other hand, the Brits know how to do things right. And they are right, almost right on the inequality frontier. Perfect, excellent, well done, Brits. So they are extracting the maximum. Indian nationalists in the room may just take note of this result if they wish. And you can get this evidence for Bihar, too, which is very high quality, as it turns out. And that's, given the errors in this data, that's pretty close to the frontier as well. So those colonial South Asia seems to be very close to the max. So the Brits are doing very well in that system. What did I just circle? I'm losing it here. Oh, thank you, Java. Java, the Dutch, they're doing pretty well, and they're not as clever as the British, but they're doing pretty well extracting what they're able to. But then there's this weird observation in 1924. Can't throw that out. So I'm not sure what happened between 1880 and 1924 in these two observations. But anyway, as you can see, you got quite a bit from the Asian. The sample includes a lot of Asian observations. Okay. We've talked about Mughal India and modern India, as well as Nueva España, doing a great job in extracting high ratios. And once again, I wonder how Spain did in the Philippines. In what was the level of inequality and how close were they to the inequality possibility frontier? I'm guessing A, the Spaniards weren't clever enough, okay? At least early 18th century. Number two, it's a frontier economy, and it's much harder to extract well in a labor-scarce frontier economy. And most of the obvious wealth was in the Manila area. I'm guessing, therefore, compared to these other countries, that the level of inequality was not all that great, say, in 1700. But things changed, as we'll see in a moment. So there it is again. And what I want you to note this time is more generally how those observations as economic development takes place. These are the rich, become the leaders in the northwestern part of Europe, the Dutch, the British, and so on. They tend to be much further down from that inequality possibility frontier. So there's a general tendency as countries develop, there's a lot of variance in the data, as countries develop to drift away from that curve, long before industrial revolutions. It's true of France, it's true of the Dutch, it's true of the English, and we'd like to know more about why that was so. And we're going to see that it continues. So the rise in the Gini, the measured inequality, it rises in pre-industrial societies, but at a slower and slower and slower rate.